In a strange way, Day is the end of something, and it's also the beginning of something. It was the end of an era. It was the end of a period of time where a group of people in Pittsburgh all came together and made films with George Romero for about 10 years.
Scared. You know what'll happen when Frankenstein gets him.
When Day came out, they immediately compared it to Dawn. Now I think people somehow pick it up and they see it differently. And they see the integrity of it as a separate film.
I think George was pretty courageous in trying to introduce a lot of ideas in a genre that is, generally speaking, pretty idea-light, you know.
Day of the Dead and his other two films before that have lived on in history because there's a lot of love behind it, there's a lot of family behind it, and a sense of integrity behind it.
It came out of what I was perceiving at the time as a disintegration of values of trust and trust in institutions, trust in government, so I think that it all added basically to the patina of the film. After Dawn of the Dead, there wasn't pressure really to do another Dead movie, but right after Dawn of the Dead, we made a deal with Salah Hassanen's company, a 3-picture deal. And all he wanted as part of the deal was that one of the 3 pictures would be a sequel to Dawn.
The one problem that George also was dealing with was the legal issues of the fact that he could not keep the same characters in the 3 movies because of rights issues.
Obviously, Salah wanted a sequel to Dawn because Dawn was so damn successful worldwide. He was looking for another zombie film, as he called it, and that was Day.
And I didn't want it to come quickly. I didn't want to do it first. So we went and did the other 2 films first.
Because George wanted to make Night Riders. He wanted to make Creepshow. And he knew Salah wanted Day. It was a way of holding off and ensuring our bet was that we could make those other films.
So there was really never any of that immediate pressure.
Well, as I remember the original script, it was much closer to some ideas that he ultimately put into Land of the Dead, which is a city surrounded by the dead, but which was in itself an island of serenity that had been kind of carved out of all this madness and chaos. There are elements of Day of the Dead in that original script, the experimentation of Logan and trying to teach the zombies and all of that stuff. But it was a much bigger tapestry, if you will.
It was just bigger. It was bigger. I had boats. I had much more Florida action, Okefenokee swamps and, airboats and all kinds of crazy things in it. And it just really became a budget issue.
Yeah, it was Raiders of the Lost Ark with zombies. And George and I met often to discuss how to do elaborate explosions happening next to people with plexiglass protecting. I remember stuff like that.
Salah actually was willing to do the film at $7 million, which is what we estimated it would have cost. He was willing to do that, but he was not willing to let it be an unrated film at $7 million. He said, I'll put 3 into unrated.
But had we made Day first, we would have had that pool of money that Sala was offering. And I think we could have made that Day of the Dead script. What happened, obviously, is we made Night Riders, and it had a week release. It's a costly film, but a week release. Thus, a poor box office. Creepshow was a moderate success, but it was sold to Warner Brothers, so they took a lion's share of the money. And what monies were left to make Day were minimal.
I mean, it took me a while to sort of get there in my head and to come up with this whole idea of, people not getting along and, the military being the crazy one.
Sit down or so help me God, I'll have you shot.
What?
That's what was happening to us, to people in the world today. That's what we were doing. And it came out of what I was perceiving at the time as a disintegration of values of trust. And that's really what this film is about, the loss of community. Because even though you got all these factions, even in a small group of people, they can't pull it together. They can't work together.
I said shut up!
It's sort of like the Congress today.
When George had to cut it down to accommodate the budget, we ended up confining it really to the cave, to the place where the scientists and the military had holed up to do their experiments.
Basically, all I lost were some action sequences that are absolutely unnecessary to make the point of the film. People often say to me, don't you wish you could have made that? And I say, you know what? I made the film that I wanted to make because I took the essence of what was in it and just reduced it down, and I think all to the good. I think it turned out better.
I lived in Erie, Pennsylvania with my mother. My dad was in Pittsburgh. This was for about a 6-year period. And in the 5th grade, however old you are, I came back to live with my dad and mother in Pittsburgh. And I had no idea that my father was that well known.
Bill Cardille, who was really our chief supporter when we were shooting Night of the Living Dead, our first film. He had a show on the air in Pittsburgh called Chiller Theater, and he would show these little horror movies.
So when Night of the Living Dead came out, they had this big limo pick us up as a family, and we went, and honest to God, I spent the whole movie in the lobby because I couldn't watch it. I had graduated from CMU, and I was in New York for many years, and I had done a lot of work there, a lot of theater work.
I went to see Laurie in a play in New York, and I just thought she was a knockout, really great. I asked her right on that trip, I said, would you want to play this role?
Well, first I wanted to approach Sarah like, I said to George, let's play her like her teeth are broken and her, it's the end of the world, because I'm coming from the theater and I'm like, he said, Laurie, that's not this kind of film. So also that was a challenge as an actress because I was playing, she kind of looks okay, and but as an actor I wanted to play her rough and tough, And for me it was a character that was much more complicated than she let on.
You are afraid, aren't you?
It was a demanding role because she had to go through an enormous amount of emotional changes, from being a very strong scientist and very dedicated to being incredibly vulnerable.
I mean, it's a male cast, pretty much, and there she is. And a heavily populated male crew, too. But she was always the lady, always very gracious.
It was all about the strong woman and sort of adopting a certain inner core of don't mess with me. And that's what was so brilliant, I think, about George's work at the time, is that he was feeling that movement happening, knowing that movement, and brought this character to the screen.
She was like a rock. She was like a steadying point, because you didn't want to break, not fragility, but her sensibility. You didn't want to go in and yell her out of the wind, even though I attempted to.
Is that clear?
Yes, sir. Fuck you, sir. she was the backbone of this movie. In fact, I think it's the first time a really strong woman carried a horror film. Not some weak damsel in distress, but somebody that was there to take charge, and Laurie sure did.
Once again, it was back to the learning experience and being able to work with a director that was so gracious. And that was a really nice feeling for me, especially doing that project, learning so much at the time, and having a director that respected actors.
Laurie's Sarah, and if you know anything about Sarah biblically, Sarah's the mother of all nations. So Sarah survives, and maybe the human race can start over again when they're out there on the island, and maybe there's a chance for the world to start over and become a better place because of Sarah, Laurie Cardille.
Hey! Well, what do you know? Welcome to civilization, Sarah.
Terry Alexander and Jarlath Conroy, yeah, we were the three amigos. And what was nice about that with Terry and Jarlath is they too came from, had a theater background. And so the three of us approached our works in a similar way.
Terry and Jarlath, who played John and Billy Boy, were very much on the set like they were in character. Jarlath was probably a little bit more sociable with the rest of the crew, in particular those of us who like to tip a few at the end of the day. I'd probably say that Terry was a little bit more under control.
We didn't hang out at all, man. You would think these two guys would hang out afterwards and go drinking and stuff like that, and we did none of that. He just knows his craft extremely well, and we knew we had to present a kind of camaraderie that is cool.
Terry has some brilliant moments where he delivers material that, in essence, explains the situation, offers hope for the future. Jarlath, likewise, gives an reinforcement to that because they're character pals, in essence. So yeah, they're very, very important to the film because they rather than the film being always up and down, they're kind of a steady state.
I really loved their two characters because they really didn't give a shit initially about anybody. But when the shit hits the fan, who steps up the most? Those two guys.
We're getting to make this a habit, man. Pointing guns at each other, you know.
Terry Alexander is one of the sweetest guys in the world. I mean, he walks into any room and charms everybody. He's just a fabulous guy, and he is that character.
I didn't hear about Day of the Dead until I found out he was looking for someone who can do a West Indian accent, man. I have to do this all the time for the people. They don't believe it's me in the movie. So that's what happened. When he was described in the script, he was big, 6'5", huge man, like George Romero. And I thought, oh, George wrote this for himself, which was very interesting because it had a nice perspective as to why all of this was happening, and which he penned. So I was nothing like that, man. I was like 160 pounds tops, man, you know. But when he heard me do it, he knew that, here it is, let's go with this.
Let's get in that old whirly bird there, find us an island someplace, get juiced up, and spend what time we got left soaking up some sunshine. How's that?
I didn't want him to be, you know, the SWAT guy like Ken Foray. And I just thought he had the perfect quality for it.
This is a great big 14-mile tombstone.
Maybe the most profound speech, for lack of a better word, is delivered by Terry's character.
You ain't never gonna figure it out. Just like they never figured out why the stars are where they're at. It ain't mankind's job to figure that stuff out. So what you're doing is a waste of time, Sarah. And time is all we got left, you know.
To me, that speech, again, captured what George was trying to do with the zombie trip and how human beings tend to devour each other instead of giving each other a kind of helping hand. They would rather eat each other up. It's so literate, it's so well done, it's almost poetic.
Maybe he figured we was getting too big for our britches, trying to figure his shit out.
That's the last thing we did on the shoot. It was absolutely amazing, man. It was wonderful to get that kind of symbolic kind of trip going at the same time. Beautiful stuff.
Tim DeLeo was one of my best friends in Pittsburgh. Always there, always available, always ready to do whatever.
There was a play where I was playing a rather screwed up individual, and I think this might have had something to do with giving me the role of Miguel, because he is obviously not in the best of shape, you know.
We're all collapsing. This whole fucking unit is collapsing, everybody except you.
I remember Tim DeLeo as being probably the most method actor of that whole crew. He had a really difficult time because he had to be emotionally wrung out.
It was a bit taxing, you know, because of just how I work and having to stay in that space. And actually the days being shot out of sequence, how screwed up am I today, what just happened yesterday, and then the next day it could be much further along in the script and he's really gone. On the set it was a friendly kind of atmosphere. I had to like escape and prepare and not get too into like having fun.
You made me look like an asshole out there.
He had sort of an effete quality, particularly when he was sort of getting whiny, and I thought it was sort of a perfect childlike quality.
Why don't you take a sedative, Sarah, so you can sleep?
People can see it as a weak, but it was, I respected him for being able to play it the way he did. There were dangers to that character in playing it, but I think Tim pulled it off well.
No one else seems to be that worried about it being the end of the world, and they're going around like it's just a regular Army day, when in fact, you know, it's not a good day for anybody.
What are we hoping for here? Hoping to satisfy the urge. You see, Sarah, they are us.
Richard Liberty was in a film I made called The Crazies, and I thought he was great. And I thought when I wrote the character of Frankenstein for Day of the Dead, I had Richard in mind when I was writing it.
I think it's a credit to George's writing that he was able to deliver a character that, outside of a zombie movie, was still an incredibly interesting and rich character.
You can destroy my specimens, but what about the millions more that are waiting to greet you outside? Do you really think you can blow the piss out of them? All of them?
He was so in the moment and so perfect for that character. And he brought out some wonderful things that the movie needed.
They can be fooled, you see. They can be tricked into being good little girls and boys. Same way we were tricked into it, on the promise of some reward to come.
He took that role, which could have been quite zany and impossible and hard to believe, and did an incredible job, I thought.
I'll show them that these creatures can be domesticated even without the surgery.
I had a lot of fun watching him, and especially him and his association with Bob.
Hello, Bob. Here's some toys for you.
Richard was one of those guys who had just a very fast motor. He spoke quickly, he thought quickly, he was a quick human being. I tend to be at the other end of the spectrum. I tend to be somewhat of a slow talker. And he was playing a scientist whose purpose there was to discover, to find out what would happen.
You remember them from before? From before.
I think what happens when actors are doing their work properly is they make each other's work easier. And so I think that there was something organic happening.
Civility must be rewarding.
Richard was a big loss. I mean, this is a guy that had been around a long time. This is a guy that knew his craft.
And somebody told me he was so touched to find out that people loved the film and loved his work in the film.
He would just enjoy how the fans are finding this movie again. I know that Richard would have really enjoyed this. I wish he was around.
Steele, shoot that woman.
Bang! You're dead! Lay off the fucking booze for a while, why don't you? Nice hat, asshole!
I think we found Gary Clark in an open audition, and he just walks into the room and forget it. He's the guy. I mean, he's that guy.
Keep it up, and I'll shove that bottle of yours right up your wise ass. Jello!
If you can believe it or not, I think this is the genius of George, at least for me. I went in and read for Rhodes. And George, I think somewhere along the line said, wait, I got Joe Pilato here. And he saw Big Steele, the real soldier. And let's take the martinet. Napoleon, the little guy, the power. There's your Rhodes, Pilato, and there's your Steele. And that's how it kind of worked out. I never really read for Steele. I read for Rhodes, and I believe it or not, I think it's the genius of George. Steele, to me, was the ultimate soldier. You needed a killer, he could kill. Somebody needed a beating, he needed a beating. He comes across as a bully, as a racist, as a sexist.
Whip it out! That'll bring him on! Fucking A, biggest piece of meat in the cave.
You know, as it happens to actors sometimes, you know, you're thinking you're on one side and you're going, oh, fuck, this isn't working, this guy. Fucking Gary, no, he just came in, he owned the scene, and that was it.
Again, not too stereotypical. He stayed away from being over the top. You know, mean-spirited, but not over the top.
Your best ain't good enough, asshole.
He has moments where you read so much in his facade. He's an incredible actor.
Steele did not die like that in the original script. It was almost very meek. And I said, George, can we work on my death scene? What's your idea, Gary? I said, I got to redeem Steele. I want to make him a Catholic. I want people to know that this guy believes in something, because you're in hell on earth. There ain't no dialogue. It's Steele making the sign of the cross, knowing he has one bullet left, and I, as Steele, do not want to become the thing that I hate the most. I loved playing Steele. It was 2 hours of me, and I say this with love. Sometimes this could be taken the wrong way. I loved chewing the scenery for 2 hours. It was one of the most wonderful, truthfully, it may have been the most wonderful role I've ever really played on film.
We gotta blast them, Captain.
That'd be doing him a favor, Steve.
I don't want it to do anything but drop over. Let's rock! We're running low on ammunition. We're running low on men, for Christ's sake. This is a fucking war! Shut up!
Joe Pilato, to me, will always be the definitive Rhodes.
It was like somebody had ripped the soul of Joe Pilato out and put the soul of, I don't know, Adolf Hitler back in. It was unbelievable.
He would get so damn intense that, you know, he could get pretty scary at times, you know.
I'm running this monkey farm now, Frankenstein, and I want to know what the fuck you're doing with my time.
Well, before Rhodes, I had done a nice scene in Dawn of the Dead, which in the American version was pretty cut to the bone. Time passes, and the word was out on the street, you know, that George is making another movie.
Apparently everybody's telling me that I'm supposedly the villain of the movie, which I'm really not.
I get a call from Chris Romero, and she says, George wants you to play Rhodes. And I put the phone down, and then I did one of these yeehaw things that you see in the things. And in the middle of the yeehaw thing, I'm going, what the fuck if I can't produce?
I'm not so sure we need you at all.
Fucking A.
I'm not even sure just what the hell it is you're doing in there.
He had a big theater career and a highly respected actor in the theater. And so I came into it knowing that he had a really big talent.
I want to know if you're doing something that's going to help us out of this deep shit we're in. Or if you're all in there just jerking each other off.
He has the chops. I mean, he's got a good delivery, and he's got basically really good chops. I wanted him to be fanatic, and I didn't know how far to go. I honestly didn't know how far to take it. And Joe didn't either. I mean, that was Joe's instinct, was to really go over the top with it.
What the fuck is wrong with you people? They're dead!
I never read Rhodes any other way. Any human being in that situation would be just sick to death of what was happening to the world. But now you take a military man whose expertise is to destroy.
I've seen 1,000 of them. He's gonna die.
And then he had this uniform. Once he put the uniform on, he would transform even more. And you could see in his eyes that, this madness. And yeah, it's over the top in many ways, but the situation is over the top.
Those are my men in there!
Somewhere after the first few days of shooting, he was actually on my ass for saying, don't let me go over the top that way. And I said, yeah, but it's working. It's great.
A lot of actors are like that. They go outside in instead of inside out. A lot of actors will whisper, and then you got to bring them out a little more. But George's technique with Joe was wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful actor.
They were saying I was over the top. I say no. I said, this is the point of view. It was like, this is fucking stupid. Kill him.
When you're dealing with living dead people, you got to get a little intense. So I loved working with Joe.
It was a very balanced shoot. You knew you had the license to speak or to try, and you also knew that you had the responsibility to abjure to the director's vision. It was quite a thing.
I used to have a van that had a TV in the back seat for the kids, and they put on Day of the Dead, and so in the front seat, I'm driving and I'm listening to it, and you know what? It works as a radio show. I mean, it completely works as a radio show, and I was cracking up, and particularly at Joe. I mean, some of those lines when maybe it softens it a little when you're not looking at him. But I just thought it was terrific. I still think it was the way to go.
The thing about this movie, and I think which is one of the reasons why George says it's one of his best movies, is great drama involves the collision of different points of view. And in that situation, I empathized with that. That's George. That's the magnificence of George.
That period of time in Pittsburgh was really kind of a magical time for all of us because it truly was an independent period of time in the film business. The same crew that goes really back to Dawn of the Dead and even some of the earlier George's movies in various incarnations carried through all of those movies into Night Riders, into Creepshow, into Day of the Dead. And in each one of those situations, we'd all hole up in some motel somewhere, and we were all living together. And so it was, I guess you would call it a family of sorts, because every day you'd wake up with the same people, go to work with the same people, come home with the same people, have a few drinks, pass out, and do it all over again the next day for months.
You know, we brought a huge staff with us to Florida and did that whole street as an abandoned city street. And that was a lot of work. And then that was hands-on all day. I believe it was, we dressed it the day before, all night or something, and then shot it the whole day. I mean, it was a big, very grueling shoot day.
As George's second unit director, I directed all of the opening zombie sequences on the streets of Fort Myers. And Ernest Dickerson, who was Spike Lee's cinematographer, came down and shot it with me. And we had a great time. The city was phenomenal. They closed down an entire section of the city, and Cletus Anderson did his wonderful art direction with turning it into a dead zone with all the debris and the detritus of everybody that had left and fled.
For me anyway, it was my biggest exterior location that I'd ever done at that point.
So we had an alligator because I wanted an example of how the city had been completely overrun. So we found a crocodile wrangler, and he brought this massive alligator on the back of a truck, and we put it in this bank and had it come out, and the two wranglers dressed up as zombies so that they could be near it. But the poor thing, when they were unloading it from the truck, they dropped it. And it hit its nose, and it was bleeding from its nose. But we got the shot of the thing coming down, and the thing was really pissed off, and it just swung its tail, and I heard this, wow! And I look around, and here's this guy flying through the air because the alligator had just like hit him with his tail and knocked him completely off his feet. The best laid plans, but we got the shot.
The crew that came over from Miami, there were 6 of us all together. We made up about 5 or 6 zombies a day for the crowd scenes that appear in the above ground sequences.
And they turned out, and it was really a great experience. The areas around where the elevator shaft that's supposed to go down into the mine took place was a very convenient location. We were only there for about a week.
We shot the top part of that in Florida, but the scene where the elevator goes down, we shot that really first. It was a cold day in Pittsburgh, and they had a missile silo.
It was relatively seamless and looked believable. And that, you know, when you're doing movies that you have to jump locations or you're trying to like trick the audience, that's one of the things we do all the time.
It was just great to be on outside because we were all so sick. You know, we spent a couple months in that limestone cave.
This ain't a goddamn field trip, people. I'm not down in this cave for my health. I'm down here on orders.
I wrote for this location. I knew about it. I'd been to visit it, and it's a limestone mine in Beaver, Pennsylvania. That's actually a bomb shelter. There are things stored there. There are Hollywood negatives that are stored in there.
They store multiple records from Washington, D.C., government records. They store government-bought cheese, surplus cheese, that is just like laying around down there. They have all kinds of boats from the rivers and the lakes of western Pennsylvania, which are stored there in the winter, because it was a cavern that was a constant 55 degrees, always, no matter what the weather was upstairs.
And it's huge. I mean, it goes on forever. We never went all the way to the end of it. And who knows what's out there, you know, somewhere. The Morlocks live there somewhere.
But we would do things like, you know, borrow the golf carts and go traipsing in the mine. The mine was immense. There was a 27-acre underground lake in there that was pitch black, so we would wear little lights on our helmets and go.
It's dark, yeah, you got mining helmets. You go into that lake with the machine, your lights will be extinguished. You could be this far from the edge, you'll panic and you'll drown.
There was this black stuff on the walls, and I couldn't figure out what it was till I got really close, and they were all bats hibernating.
So it was really rough conditions and very hard to light, really hard to light. If you want to make it look as big as it actually is, you have to put lights hundreds of yards away.
It was a very nasty and depressing place to be constantly.
I mean, it helped me emotionally, but it also lowers your immune system and makes you more prone to all the stuff that was in the air down there.
After 3 or 4 weeks of this, because there was a lot of dust in the mine and it was dank, a lot of people got very, very sick. Hoarse, coughs.
You'd blow your nose, you'd come up with like, what is this black stuff that usually is all over you, but now it's like all over inside of you too. You were constantly breathing this stuff.
Let's see if everybody in the film has some kind of respiratory problem since then. I have asthma, so.
We would have a call at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, so we'd go in there, it was totally dark. We'd come out, it would still be dark. So none of us saw daylight for about 3 months.
I mean, we had this guy called Dr. Feelgood. It's kind of a weird story because he ended up ODing, but he'd come in with the B12. I'm sure we all had some like severe, after 8 weeks, vitamin D deficiency.
We all developed mine fever, you know. I don't know how to describe that except we needed entertainment. We needed to do something.
They had to fire up these huge generators with these huge kind of blast furnaces to keep people warm.
The actual sets that we shot in the offices is a part of the management facility within the mine. So they just allowed us to use those offices and working around their ones, the rooms that they needed for administrative purposes, but we reused some other rooms that they weren't using and dressed all that.
To do the scene where the hands come out of the wall, and they built this wall, it cost a lot of money to build this wall and time and effort, but they didn't anticipate that when everybody pushed through the wall, the whole thing would go with the force, would kind of fall down. And it did, and it fell on top of me, so it was very funny, but also the poor crew, they had to rebuild it and do all that.
Action.
It was a cohesive crew because we'd all worked together before, so we all pulled together and made it through. But it was not an experience I'd like to repeat.
Tom Savini is the most creative, the most energetic guy that you want you could ever ask for on a set. He's always there. He's always eager and looking for what can we do? What can we do now? How can we make this better?
I mean, we came up with a lot of the deaths ourselves. And that's the fun, to think of the stuff and then execute it and do it, you know. We started months ahead of time in my house.
We had, I think, a good bit of time, several, maybe 4 months to build all that stuff. We had a very small crew, but we had a long schedule. And Tom really likes to make sure everything's prepared before we even go on set. That he doesn't like having to build stuff as you're, as you're dealing with set operations.
All these people were in my basement every day, whipping up foam latex and filling up dozens and dozens of small, medium, and large zombie appliances, so that we would have a shitload of those when it came time to make the movie. And I remember we started the morning that way, foam latex molds, standing on all the molds until it gelled, and then shoving them in the oven, and then going about and creating other effects, and then pulling those molds out every day. Day of the Dead was top guys. Today they're even top guys. Greg Nicotero, Howard Berger of K&B, John Vulich of Optic Nerve, Everett Burrell, who now does visual effects, Mike Tursik, who was the foreman on the T-Rex sculpture for Jurassic Park. Yeah, top guys.
But it was Tom's creativity, all of it. Basically, it was his work, his thought process, his creativity, and everything else.
Yeah, I was just going through and thinking about past effects, like the machete had a groove cut out of it so it fit over Lenny Lee's head. How can we do a reverse thing but better? And that turned into the shovel gag of cutting off a guy's whole top of his head with a shovel. Same technique, cutting the shovel out, putting blood tubing, a real person, then fake dummy, chop, and then a remote control head that would land, Oh.
I mean, it is a challenge, shooting effects scenes, especially makeup effects scenes. To the benefit of the production, Tom was an ex-camera person in Vietnam, had a wonderful understanding of photography, and he and I worked closely on each and every shot, setting up shots, looking at lighting, looking at approach, looking at camera speed, so that he was always a compliment to me, and likewise we could rationalize and create the right kind of shot, the right kind of atmosphere, each and every time.
We had to actually create the editing, on how it was edited, because we started off with the rubber arm, but when the machete hit it, it bounced off and did not look real at all. So we had to take dig a chunk out of the rubber arm and build wax in there, or clay or something. So when the machete hit it, it stuck in there, okay? Then we replaced that with Tim's real arm and the trick machete that had a groove cut out of it, so it looks like it's in his arm. So when she's pressing to cut the arm off, you can see his real hand moving. Now we go to the arm that's actually going to be cut and moved away from him, and then they cauterize. It was a bloody stump, and they cauterized that.
This is, pre-all computerized craziness, and I had to have my, left arm underneath me in a hole, and I was much more flexible then. But, I have to say, it was very, very cold. It still was a lot of fun, if that even can be in those conditions, but it was.
Here, I've gone into the center here and attacked the R complex discreetly. I've removed it from the equation in this course.
Some of the gags had nicknames, right? Like Moose Clit. I think that was the one on the table where you see the body, and you see the head cut off laying there. I think that was called Moose Clit.
Because it looked like a big moose clit, You might put some beeps in there,
That's a cut. Okay.
That was another one of Tom Savini's kind of like stage magic illusions, where there's actually a real human being in there with his head going through a hole in the table, and we just glued it onto his neck while his head was through there. So from a staging standpoint, for us it wasn't really too difficult, but for the performer, he had to be buried with his head in a hole on a table for the good portion of a day as we shot that scene, and we didn't necessarily have a dummy or anything to replace him when we were doing wide shots, so that was difficult for him.
Action, Barry. Left arm. Right.
People will see that and think that the hands are moving and it's a fake. It's Barry Gress. That's his real body. Poor Barry, it's the late Barry Gress. Back then he was like, "Can I be in the movie? Come here. Hey Barry, we got a part for you." Moose Clit. When we cast Mike's body, he had to lie inside a hole because I didn't want to add a chest to him and have it build up so high. So because we cast him in a hole, and on the table he was in a hole, so when the fake chest went on him, it was the same height as his body, and it helped it look very real. There were real guts because in my mind nothing moves or slithers or lands as and splatters like the real thing. Rubber guts would have maybe bounced, but we did build he did have inside of him a long rubber large intestine that we would wrap the guts around, so that when he came up and turned sideways, they would slide down that long rubber thing, and that's all that was left dangling out of him when the guts hit the floor. We did the same thing with Tim DeLeo when it happened with him.
The gut spill was very interesting, being a vegetarian, and having pig guts slid into this little pocket of goo. That was interesting, and the smell was interesting, but I'll tell you, Tom is really good, and his crew is very good.
Oh, wow. I'm gonna slide off the...
It was like a creative college frat party. everybody wanted to hang out in the lab. They had a huge room. And you knew that's where all the fun was happening.
Tom's definitely the party magician who did good in his life. He definitely had every practical joke, or all the things you read in the back of a comic book that you can buy to scare your friends. Tom owns 3 of them.
They had so much fun. Sometimes I envied them because I thought, oh, they're having all the fun in a way, like the goofiness and the pranks and the silliness. And I wanted to be one of the boys. I really did. It's like, I mean, that was like my childhood. I always wanted to be like as a tomboy, I wanted to be with the smart boys that were, being silly in school. And they were like the smart, goofy boys that I wanted to hang out with.
One of the common things, if you sat in his barber chair, he would handcuff you to it and nail you to streaks and tips. That was pretty common. I remember being chased around one day by Tom doing something, and Nicotero pointed at a fire extinguisher on the wall. And he pointed, "Get Tom with this."
And he sprays me in the face with the chemical fire extinguisher.
I thought it was CO2. I didn't know it was the powder. So I shot Tom right in the face with the chemical extinguisher.
And he scratched my eye. I had to go to the hospital. They took me to the hospital.
Thinking I blinded Tom Savini for life, I was pretty depressed.
And then I wore a patch. And so the whole crew wore a patch over their eye, a white bandage, because of Everett blasting me in the face.
I remember calling my mom saying, "I think I just killed Tom Savini." And she went, "Who's Tom Savini?" I said, "Mom, you don't understand. He's the king of gore. I killed him."
60 Winston, take 1.
Tom was as I remember correctly, Tom was a very precise individual. He wasn't one to let anything go. In other words, everything had to be precise and right on the mark. Actually, in the long run, that made things so much easier. The effects took a long time to set up, but once they were complete, the scene itself didn't take that much time to shoot.
Ready, set.
I wasn't too crazy about that particular effect because there were like a number of zombies involved in carrying out that effect. The zombie behind him was controlling the head movements, And what I didn't like about it was there were so many zombie hands in, you couldn't see Tasso's body. Because it was built to stretch and tear like the head in the thing, So you didn't quite get that effect. And I didn't realize till years later, someone told me, "Oh, did you notice how the voice gets higher when the vocal cords get stretched?" Well, that was actually kind of simple. I mean, we just did an appliance on his forehead. And the eyeball was already out, so when they pulled the flesh, you just assume that the eye pops. And then the flesh is torn and he screams so beautifully,
It was just awesome to watch those guys work, and with the little test tubes and the things they were doing, and you were saying, "Oh my God, how are people going to deal with this? How are they really going to deal? This is like ahead of its time stuff."
He had a foam skin on a head, and he was going to make this rotted zombie, but he was drilling a hole near the face, and the foam caught around the drill bit and ripped the whole jaw off. And I think that's how Dr. Tongue started. I think it was a complete fucking accident on Tom's part, that he just ripped the whole jaw off and it became something else.
It's a mold of me. We did a mold from my waist up and tore away the jaw, of course, and the foam latex. And Dave Kinlan built a fiberglass understructure and kind of mechanized the eyes so they could look around. And I think they also blinked. And it was a hand puppet that Everett Burrell would use.
Great. Looks like he's drunk. I'm limping, I'm trying on the wall.
I remember the day. the day was going, we were waiting, just waiting and waiting and waiting to shoot Dr. Tongue. The sun was going down, and it was like 4 or 5:30, you know, and it was Dr. Tongue. We put him on the set, and you couldn't see him. It was all black, and there wasn't enough time for anybody to bring a reflector to get some life in his face. So you can see in the beginning of the movie, you can see it a little bit, and then he goes black. Yeah, but you know, he worked. People glimpsed that damage, at least for a bit, which might have been a good effect. I don't know.
Well, you know, the Guts story is about as in-depth as the Kennedy assassination theory. We broke down the Pennsylvania set for a week, and they went to Florida to do the exteriors.
Before we went to Florida, you know, we bought these 5 gallons of pig guts. It's what came out of Mike Tersick, back in the barrel in the fridge. It came out of Tim DeLeo, back in the barrel and in the fridge. But while we were in Florida, somebody unplugged the refrigerator for weeks, okay.
We found that out like the first day back, which is when we had to stage that effect, so there was no time to go buy fresh, new, you know, guts.
I mean, the stench was, we could smell it for, you know, from blocks away. And poor Joe Pilato had to be there, right above them, you know, because they were in his gut.
And the first thing they said, don't eat anything or don't drink anything. And I'm like, excuse me? They said, well, you're going to be stuck in there for 4 hours.
We had gas mask on, we had putty up our nose, we had leather, English leather on our lips to smell. But Joe was completely unprotected, because you would see up his nose, he's lying down there.
If I can grab an organ, grab an organ.
If you can, yeah.
So they said, we got 3 cameras rolling, this is a one-take shot, this is the last day of shooting, we can't repeat this thing, this is it, this is it.
Tear that t-shirt apart. Get in there. Faster, get in there. Not too high, not too high. Dig into that chest. Below the belly button. Dig in.
They come in and they just start devouring me. And when I did the inhale, all of it just crushed me.
So, I mean, on my video, he was ready to puke when that scene was over. And you can see zombies fanning, because you can't imagine how bad it stunk. But what can we do? At 2 o'clock in the morning, you can't run out and get pig intestines anywhere, you know. So.
Luckily, we didn't have to. We only had to do it once, but once was enough.
People still think they see a rubber chicken come out of him. It's not a rubber. We should have put a rubber chicken on him, but no. It's just the way they grabbed the intestines and viscera kind of looked like a rubber chicken when it came out of him.
To this day, I can still smell it.
This is all Savini, you know, really. It comes out of his brain.
Tom Savini's work on Day of the Dead is a pinnacle of his career. I would say it's the pinnacle of that kind of special effects makeup to date and even beyond.
That stuff I think was a little bit more groundbreaking than I ever even realized until years later looking back on it, and that was definitely pleasant to be a part of. But it's immensely gratifying to see that there's a whole new generation now that really, you know, that is really taken to this film and really appreciates it.
Well, yeah, Day of the Dead is one of the pinnacles, an example of practical effects. You know, that's my masterpiece in splatter.
Scene, David 97, William, take 1.
Walk it.
It's really quite an amazing thing how people around this country want to be zombies. And we had thousands of them.
Savini's makeups were so damn good sometimes that you hated even to socialize with them like at lunchtime because they were so damn believable.
Georgia was very smart because he got a lot of the press. People who write about the movie to come and play zombies. And they were willing and able and ready.
And we had people that we knew showing up. We had the dean of drama at Carnegie Mellon who wanted to be a zombie. I mean, it's truly amazing when you put a zombie call. You can't believe the people that would show up and want to do it.
And some of those moments were incredible. I think some of our zombies became so method about their approach to acting that even cuts wouldn't stop some of these people. It was incredible. They were so much into their role.
We had a whole separate unit that was basically set up to not only get them made up and get them ready, but to corral them and have them standing by when we would get to those shots. It was a pretty well-oiled machine, and we never were sitting around waiting for the zombies. All those huge zombie attacks at the end of the movie, they were done in a couple of days, and it went pretty smoothly.
When the elevators go down, there's like 375 zombies there, you know. But that was a typical day that started at 2 or 3 in the morning with them coming in and me and as many guys as we could doing prosthetics.
You'll do your characters in different tiers of quality. You know, we might have the featured zombies, of which maybe we'd do a dozen of that day, or each one of us would do 3 or 4 makeups, maybe like 15 or 20 featured ones or prosthetic that would hold up to close-ups. Then you might do some crude prosthetic ones with just a wound and coloring that would be mid-ground. Tom had commissioned some masks to be made. Maybe we had like 30 or so masks that we would use, but I always kind of felt stylistically they were very different than the makeups we were using, and those worked for deep background.
But every time the press came to the set, George was surrounded by the guys wearing the masks. Awful, cheap-looking masks, you know?
I showed up not really knowing what a zombie was because there was, you know, not that much familiarity with the zombies at that time. I did not look at other movies to research my character other than, of course, being very familiar with The Night of the Living Dead and having seen those zombies. But George said, do whatever you feel.
It's really not something you prepare for, but I did think it out. I worked on the sounds that I would be making.
That wasn't very nice, you know. That wasn't very nice at all.
Dr. Logan, Richard Liberty, at one point turns the light out on me.
You can just sit there in the dark.
And I wanted to play it almost like a humanized zombie, with, like that I was afraid. And I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm sort of whimpering too.
The makeup process took like probably 4 hours. I remember getting there real early in the morning.
The latex wasn't really comfortable, and especially as they glued it. And I remember the lip especially kept coming out. I remember breaking for lunch, and the lip kept coming out, and like food would fall down, and it was just incredibly uncomfortable. That food. I think after that, I didn't eat.
It also took, you know, a long time to take off, but that wasn't something that anyone was really that interested in.
Yeah, this photograph's great. Is this the only way to do it?
When the shooting was over, then you're sitting there like, oh God, I can't get this off.
Poor zombies at the end of the day. Today, if you come off a set in an appliance makeup, there's somebody there to remove the glue gently. We just said, oh, just tear it off and go home. So zombies were like tearing the epithelial layer of their skins off.
And everybody was, you know, quick to leave, and I had the makeup on. I thought, oh darn, I'm just gonna, you know, get in the car and drive home.
I had to drive home as a zombie. I'm sure that the toll booth operator thought it was the zombie apocalypse.
This person jumped out of their wits. They were so horrified to see me.
And after that, George made a rule that somebody had to stay till the last actor left. You know?
I wrote the script wanting to have this sympathetic zombie who was clearly able to be taught certain things. My theory about zombies is that they're not intelligent. They just can remember behaviors and remember things.
Say hello, Aunt Alicia.
I think Bub is a big part of that film because there is you look at zombies in a different way. You know, it's like, wow, what if they started becoming collective and a little smart? You know, they're pretty unstoppable as it is, but if they know how to, you know, open doorknobs, we're fucked.
And so I had this character, Frankenstein's character, who was gently bringing the bub character along, but sort of in the wrong way.
He's a pretty minor character in the original script, and then once I was on the set and George saw what I was doing and he decided that he wanted more of Bub in the film, and so we dreamed up other scenes for him. But basically, I think all I had to do was fool around with a gun and eat something. That's really was the whole audition.
I didn't know Howard Sherman's work from before. I heard a little bit about it. He had a great deal of theatrical experience, which I think served him really well in this particular situation. But I also think that he had some mime experience. And of course, with a character that can't speak, that was really invaluable.
You don't know how many times we'll have like a small minor part and they'll just, I'll put an extra in there. I go, no, you need to have a real actor in it. And Howard was a consummate actor.
He listened to George. George gave him a lot of suggestions, a lot of approach that he took upon himself. They worked very, very closely.
I wasn't really so much interested in replicating what anyone else did. I wanted to do what I thought would make it real. George had suggested at some point that he wanted Bub to be sort of infant-like. They haven't developed eye-hand coordination. They can't, it's sort of moving randomly. And that's what you see an infant doing, just really essentially experimenting with this amazing machine that they haven't learned how to operate yet.
And I did the sculptures for Bub, which were heavily inspired by the work that was done on a film called Shockwaves, I think Alan Ormsby did. Very similar kind of to the makeup he did on Scott Reiniger in Dawn of the Dead, where he's kind of waking up from the dead before they shoot him. He had that kind of stretch and stipple, kind of crinkly look. So I guess I was thinking of just retaining some kind of continuity from the textures and style that he had built in Dawn of the Dead.
The first time I stood in front of a mirror and looked at myself in full Bub makeup, it was kind of magical and kind of horrifying all at once, because foam latex moves like real flesh.
It was flexible enough that Howard could use his actual expressions.
A lot of actors haven't worked with prosthetics. I think they're not always aware of how to work with the prosthetic because it is an inhibiting factor on your face. I've kind of found that actors that work in theater seem to be some of the best actors to work in prosthetics because I think theater kind of somehow gives them the background and the same skills where they have to act realistically enough that the first row will believe that it's a real character, but they have to overact enough so that the farther rows in the theater can also read their performance. And I think they're more in tune with how much you have to act or overact.
So there was a much greater freedom, a freedom of discovery, for instance. A lot of that, I didn't plan it until the moment that it occurred. It gave me the freedom to discover in the moment Bub's experience of trying to figure out what these things were.
I spent hours watching Howard Sherman. It was a transformative performance, I thought. And I had a lot of opportunities just to sit and watch these two guys kind of work with one another.
George had said if I had any ideas because he wanted more of Bub in the film, don't hesitate to suggest them. And the thought had occurred to me, what would Bub make of music? That scene wasn't in the original script. We were setting up to shoot the scene and we still weren't quite sure exactly what the scene would be. So I just, if he moved too fast, I just wouldn't see it and I wouldn't respond. And I basically, just by being a dumb, slow zombie, forced him to wave his finger in front of my face and let me find the finger and then very slowly move it down.
Again, remind you that it's not a monster, this is a human being. And that's what works so well with Bub, is this whole kind of tension between there's still the human aspect, but there's the monster that can at any moment, like pop out of him.
I mean, I think it rivals Karloff. Sherman's performance in Day of the Dead, I think deserves kudos, an Oscar, you know? He's just wonderful.
I happen to believe that George saw himself in Bob. And I think it was kind of an interesting allegory in terms of what he was going through as a director on this production that was kind of painful, and he was in essence being manipulated and somewhat turned around in terms of what he wanted to do versus what he had to do.
The resulting film is pretty much everything that we shot. And actually the edit was really, really smooth, really smooth. Pat Buba did a great job.
It was a pretty accelerated schedule, even not considering it being a Romero movie. It was a pretty accelerated schedule, so I moved pretty fast. It wasn't shot too much in sequence, so it took a while to get the characters. And then of course the big scene, the big confrontation scene in the big hall, and there was so much footage of that and so much coverage, and that it took a while just to fish through all of that stuff.
Nothing happens around here without my knowing about it.
I mean, the script supervisor, her line notes were there were so many lines going through the script page that you couldn't see the words beneath it. I mean, he shot so much coverage on that scene. It stayed pretty much to the script. We would drop lines out periodically, and most of it was for rhythm, not necessarily to speed up scenes.
It's working on instinct, a deep, dark, primordial instinct.
By that time, I had done 3 films with George, and so I was comfortable with, having the shorthand to be able to take things out, just that I would see on my own.
What does that mean?
It means keeping them from wanting to eat us, for one thing.
There wasn't any major action scenes that we didn't include. Some of them are, of course, you cut them down, and you cut them down just purely out of sense of rhythm. I don't remember going through the time problems with that film of saying, we need to lose 10 minutes out of the film. We never really had that. We could cut the film to make it exist for its own living entity.
Just 5 minutes.
It was different than some of the other films that I did with George, because we really didn't do a Thames score.
Great thing working with George is that he loves his collaborators to be part of the entire process. So when I was going to do the music, like Creepshow, I had access to him all through the production process because I was his assistant director. So between setups, we'd say, well, what about something like this here? Or what's the mood here? So I had all of that in my mind when we finally got to post, and then I was really sitting down and actually writing.
We were basically, in the same building. John was downstairs on the first floor, and I was up on 5 at the old Leighton Image. And I'd cut a scene, or Pat would cut a scene, and we'd send it down, and John would score it.
We would shoot things off the screen with a little 1/2-inch video camera. We would run a 1/2-inch tape down to John in the basement, just open the door and throw it in.
He was doing it all on a Prophet 5 synthesizer. And, same day we would have it scored. Bada bing, it's just like that.
The initial motifs that I was coming up with were based on the original script, which had a very sort of Caribbean, Floridian feeling to it. And George and I had talked about this before anyway, that we wanted kind of a counterintuitive approach to the music so that it wasn't a relentlessly dark and oppressive musical experience. I think my score surprised a lot of people at the beginning because I don't think it was what they expected. I think they probably thought there was going to be more of a traditional horror type of score.
It's a little bubbly, the score. I think that's what people don't like much about it, but I love it. I love that Caribbean flavor in it. John's score was, I think, absolutely fabulous. Just what the doctor ordered.
They have to be rewarded. Reward is the key.
I really didn't know at first how controversial it was. I didn't realize that there were people that absolutely hated it. I would have killed them if I had. I guess as the movie has been reevaluated and the appreciation of it has continued to rise, so is the appreciation of the score.
It was just fun. There was a kind of an innocence to filmmaking at that time. We could just make the best film that we wanted to.
I saw the final film in New York. We had a big screening down in the middle of Manhattan, and most everybody was there.
And it was really cool because I had to take the Concorde back. They don't even have the Concorde now, but it was a really cool experience because I had to get back to this opening that we had. Quite an experience for young actors to see. Oh, you can't watch it. You can't. It's not so much watching yourself. It's the experience of, you can remember like how you shot, what you shot, where you were at the time, and I never had experienced that. The separation of not being able to be an audience member, it was like I couldn't see it. I just had no idea what it was like, for an audience member.
This was my first opportunity to work with George Romero. I said, what if this doesn't work? And Gary said, well, man, he said, everything else he's done's worked. There's no reason why this won't work. He said, for crying out loud, we put together some scenes, my man, that, are pretty ghastly. So he said, for the audience that's going to see this, it's got to work. And it did.
I hate to admit it, but my ego at that point in my life was like, how the hell do I look? I had to see it again, to see the depth of how everyone worked together.
I probably was a little pissed off that I didn't play Rhodes. I wanted to play Rhodes, but George didn't think I could do both. But the movie itself, I thought it was great. Day of the Dead is my masterpiece, yeah.
I think George was pretty courageous in trying to introduce a lot of ideas in a genre that is, generally speaking, pretty ideal light. George was raising the bar on the whole genre.
Day of the Dead.
They have overrun us, Something like 400,000 to 1 by my calculations.
Day of the Dead.
It could be years before we know exactly what we're dealing with here.
Day of the Dead.
Day of the Dead basically wound up with a little bit of a lackluster campaign. Uninspired, to say the least. And limited release. I mean, it was just not a good release. Didn't have a big distribution network, couldn't get screens.
UFD was relying upon the fact that it was George, number one. It was a sequel to his Dawn of the Dead. And that was enough. Enough said. I didn't find the trailers particularly informative in terms of what this style was.
George A. Romero's Day of the Dead, the most eagerly awaited day in horror film history.
It's funny, Howard Berger and I had done Return of the Living Dead right before we did Day of the Dead, and Return was getting a lot of buzz. I think George saw and got all depressed and angry about it, and obviously, there's that weird competition.
In fact, some of my distant relatives went to see it, Return of the Living Dead, and said, Laurie, you weren't in that movie. I said, no, that's not the movie. There was a lot of confusion around that.
Return of the Living Dead is a much different film. It's a more campy, funny kind of thing. And Day of the Dead certainly is dark and incredibly serious.
Now also, fans didn't come to see it. I think that, it had been a long time since Dawn of the Dead. Fans wanted Dawn of the Dead again, the way they want, they want comedy from Woody Allen.
I remember at the premiere of it in New York that there were audience members that actually booed at the end. And they didn't like the ambiguity of the ending. And I think, too, they did expect Day of the Dead to be more Dawn of the Dead. And it was just not that.
Dawn was loaded with relief and comedy, to some extent. And this one was straight ahead. It was an angry film.
people's expectations of having another roller coaster ride like Dawn were not met. And but George is an artist, and what's the point of just doing the same thing over and over again?
I remember being very disappointed when I watched Siskel and Ebert, and they were pretty dismissive.
This is our thumbs down movie of the week. And here's an example of the horrible, over-the-top acting. And they show my scene yelling at Logan. And I'm crying.
They couldn't stand it. They loved Dawn of the Dead. So it just came and went. And it was very disappointing for me as a young actor.
It's all right. As an actor, I was hoping this is my biggest role out here on film, and maybe somebody might recognize that I was talented and give me something else. Didn't happen at all. And I was kind of disappointed. Maybe I should sell real estate or something. We've been punished by the Creator.
And of course, as we all know, when things don't perform immediately in this business, everybody gets cold feet and runs the other way. So when it didn't come out of the gate like Dawn of the Dead did, everybody thought, well, it's a near miss.
Because we never thought of there could be any kind of ancillary life to it. Never thought anybody would ever see it again. And you know, the rating thing had a little bit to do with it.
Due to scenes of violence, no one under 17 admitted.
And you know, I mean, and the weird thing is now I can watch Walking Dead, and it's more violent than a lot of the stuff that couldn't get a rating. What George is doing. I mean, God, times have changed that way.
I have something I would like to share with you. The critic's name is Rob Gonzalez. He goes on to say, and I find this absolutely brilliant, I think part of the reason many Romero fans reacted against Day so strongly is that it showed the writing on the wall. Day of the Dead shows Romero at a low personal ebb, forced to cut down his vision to appease the guys with the money.
This operation was put together in a matter of days.
Yeah, well, it can all be taken apart in a matter of minutes, lady.
With that in mind, you understand why the soldiers in the film are depicted as hostile thugs. If you read the scientists as film artists and the soldiers as the money guys who breathe down your neck demanding results, the money and the movie become a rather personal expression of Romero's anger and depression. It was an incredible allegory.
We're all pulling in different directions.
Well, that's the trouble with the world, Sarah darling. People got different ideas concerning what they want out of life.
Day of the Dead is much more dour. It's much more downbeat. It's not a romp. And so I think all of those things just led people to not like it. It has since come around, I think, as, thanks to video and everything else. A lot of people think it's tell me that it's their favorite of my Dead films.
The themes that he's dealing with in Day of the Dead are ever present. Look at all the apocalyptic literature and movie making that's going on right now. He was at the forefront of all that. And I think the themes that he's talking about then are as relevant as they are now.
It has now emerged in the last 10 years or so as a film of some renown. I think we have grown also as an audience with the whole notion of zombies. And we suddenly realize, dear God, this is a wonderful metaphor for our lives. We are zombies, politically, socially, okay? We are the repressed, just as they are.
It's almost like a zombie story in itself, that this film has kind of come back to life, and now there are people who weren't even alive when we did it, who know it shot by shot, line by line. So there is, all of us have worked on it and now have this sense of like, well, wow.
I'm very honored to have done the character of Sarah, and I have grown to respect the whole genre of horror through Day of the Dead. I approached it as an actor and became a fan.
When I look back on it now, it's been a great ride. There's a lot of people that really enjoy it and appreciate it for whatever reasons,
It's a wonderful thing if something you performed in has become a kind of a classic. And it feels really, really good to look back and fans say, hey man, I didn't look at it then, but now, Bud D, whew, thank you.
I really appreciate the fans because without them loving this film, you know, I mean, you know, we don't work, we don't have a job. Thank you for appreciating what we did all those many years ago.
We all just became great friends, and that was it. We were done. We did what we did, and ultimately it turned out to be very fine.
I'm surprised about all of the films that I've worked on with George, that they have endured to the extent that they have. It's a well-deserved status of a man that loves to make movies and knows how to do it.
And it's as strong now as it was back then. As a matter of fact, it might even end up being stronger.
Day of the Dead has a special place for me. I mean, to be able to work with everybody that I did. The weird thing is that we're still very close. I don't have anything like that that's lasted that long.
I am very much amazed, and I have been impacted by it. Obviously, I've been asked to do shows, and people wait in line, and they talk to you, and they ask you questions.
I'm astounded at the number of people who have tattooed Bub on various parts of their body. And I was sitting at my table, and this rather attractive young woman came up to me and she said, "There's something I have to show you." She flips up her very short skirt, pulls down her panties, and there I was, my face, very good work, on her right cheek, you know?
The fact that something that I was a part of, that I worked on, has meant that meant so much to people that they're willing to permanently put it on their body as a design is just amazing to me.
You know, I think it's my favorite Dead movie because my work is better, you know. That was in the heyday of when I was out there and getting scripts and dissecting it into an effects list and hiring a crew and ordering supplies and doing it.
Dawn and Day are still popular, but Day's popularity continues to ascend. So I guess in the long run, the success of it is finally warranted.
I'm very happy that people are now sort of getting with the program, so to speak. And in fact, it's my favorite of my Dead films. But because I just love it. My second favorite is Survival of the Dead, which I am still waiting for people to understand, begin to understand. And I'm hoping that maybe the same thing will happen.
Yes, sir. Fuck you, sir.
Maybe he figured we was getting too big for our britches, trying to figure his shit out, man. They like that line.
You want me to salute that walking pile of pus? Salute my ass.
You're collapsing from stress. This whole fucking unit is collapsing. Everyone except you. So what? So fucking what? You're stronger than me, stronger than everybody, so fucking what?
Steal. Shoot them.
Bang! You're dead! That's the trouble with the world, Sarah darling. People got different ideas concerning what they want out of life, you know. Peace.
Come on, you puss bag brains of shit! There's a nice one hanging. Come and get it. That's the keeper. That's the one.
Moose clit.
That's all I'm using. That's all I'm fucking using with that. It's just Tom Spears said, moose clit. I think this is gonna be the last thing after the credits. Just you
moose clit.
I'm so gonna do that.
Do it. Do it.